This is the Real Christian Manliness Podcast with Isaac and Tim Ingram. Let's get manly. All right, everybody. Today we've got an old friend of my family's, Michael Hildreth, and he's currently serving as a chaplain in the Army. Is that correct?
That is right.
And
Got it.
how you doing today?
Hey, I'm doing great, Isaac. It's great to see you again, man.
Same here, same here. If I recall, you grew up in the same youth group as my sisters, correct?
That's right. It's been a while.
Yeah, it's been a while since I was in the youth group, and so
Yeah, man. Graduated in '93, but under Brother Clint Cavanis, who's now, of course, still in Oregon, as far as I'm aware.
Yeah.
And great youth pastor and good church there, Trinity in Arlington.
Okay, Michael. It's good to have you on the podcast today. If you could just give a little background of yourself, kind of where you've been, what the Lord's brought you through, and where you are today.
You know, interestingly, Isaac, a lot of individuals really kind of supported the call that I had. You recall that I was, not only saved at the age of 16, but called to preach at the age of 17 there out of Trinity. And not long thereafter started on the path where I was working after college as an assistant pastor for a couple years. I ended up being a senior pastor for 2 years in North Carolina. And about that same time that my wife and I got married 10 years ago in 2007, the Lord began to put on my heart about the idea and the notion of chaplaincy. And when I had gotten married to my wife before I pastored, as a senior pastor, I had been working in missions. And so the goal was to actually utilize the chaplaincy as kind of like a secondary avenue on the reserve side, whether it was, here in the States or maybe even abroad, to be able to kind of reach out to service members and help build the church that way. Initially, our plans were to go to Puerto Rico, and that kind of fell through. But we ended up here in Atlanta. I had to work a part-time job as a result of the church being very, very small in North Carolina. And so we transitioned with a job promotion to Atlanta, where I've been for the last almost 7 years. And I've been serving a brigade here. I was the deputy chaplain for about 4 of those years. And the last couple I've been serving as actually the brigade chaplain.
Awesome. If you would explain kind of the reserve side. A lot of people understand active duty military, and
Sure.
Myself as a reservist for 6 years, I understand it, but a lot of people might not. So could you explain that?
Sure. We actually serve on a normal basis about 1 week in a month and 2 weeks out of the year for what's considered to be annual training. Our ministry, or our brigade, is actually unique. We serve as a part of the 80th Training Command, and they're based out of Richmond. And they have 5 brigades underneath them. And as a brigade, we have 5 battalions underneath us, but we're a training brigade. And as a result, we're non-deployable. They will pluck or bring or pull individuals out on occasion for mobilizations or for deployments. But as a unit, our goal is to train 3 different reclass or MOSs, finance, human resources, and actual chaplain assistance, which is right up kind of what we do. But as a reservist, so it's a unique aspect from that perspective that, we're part-time soldier, part-time civilian, part-time soldier. And fitting in that and keeping up with all the requirements militarily, it actually ends up being a little bit more than part-time sometimes,
Yeah.
Especially as a chaplain.
Yeah. And that's one thing I learned in my reserve service, that it's a weird strain because you're not active duty, but you also have a full-time job mostly on the outside. And so there's a weird strain as a reservist, to balance all those things, because whenever you're training, you have stuff on the outside you have to take care of, and whenever you're not training, you'll get calls at weird times, just, hey, what's up with this? You need to do this before next drill and all that stuff. And so for me, I found it was a weird strain that I never really got a full balance of, you know?
Yes. Yeah, I would agree with you. I really am grateful for like the ESGR program. And a lot of individuals might not know what that is, but that's the employer support of the Guard and Reserve, and they basically go to bat, kind of not from a political standpoint, but more or less just with the civilian employers to ensure that our rights are protected, from the standpoint on the civilian side, career wise, and so that's important and that's good. But as a chaplain, we have 5 battalions with our unit spread out throughout the U.S. So that dynamic, like you just mentioned, Isaac, is very real for me because this weekend I'll be heading to California to visit one of my battalions and provide ministry support. And last month in May, I was in Chicago. So, we have a unit in Grand Prairie. We have a unit up in Fort Dix and then at Fort Jackson. And then we have secondary units or smaller units, what would be considered attachments, in 3 or 4 locations. So we're spread out through 10 states, but our main battalion headquarters are in 5. So, and it's all the way West Coast, East Coast, North, and South. So it provides a lot of travel opportunities, but that creates that dynamic that you're speaking of.
Yeah. One thing that, being a podcast for Christian guys and us both with military backgrounds, can you talk about kind of the pull from the military side against your Christian background, if you could?
Sure, I'll mention it in 2 ways. And first of all, from the perspective of the chaplain ministry or the Chaplain Corps. The Chaplain Corps has been around just about as long as our country has. It was started by George Washington. And the thing that I appreciate most about that pull that you're speaking of is the way that the military protects the Chaplain Corps in regards to the way it's structured. And what I mean by that is something called perform or provide. And as an independent Baptist, you well know that each of us as chaplains, whether you are independent Baptist or Southern or whatever, you have to have an endorsement along with a Master's of Divinity to be able to become a chaplain. And once you get in the chaplain ministry, this perform or provide protects who you are. So you either perform the service or help provide it because they believe in the construct of the First Amendment. And I love that because there have been lawsuits that have been brought and that have tried to criticize the military for establishing religion by allowing the Chaplain Corps. And what's unique about the Chaplain Corps is they have allowed the chaplains in their individual religious endorsements to speak for the religions rather than them trying to say, this chaplain can hold to this, or just this chaplain can hold to that, or this soldier can hold to that. So they allow the freedom of religion, of the exercise of religion for all soldiers, including chaplains. So I'll never be forced to perform a service that is against my religious endorsement. And I very much appreciate that aspect of it. And it's something that a lot of civilians don't know.
Wow, that's an interesting thought because if you're in a situation that's say your platoon or unit or whatever you're serving with is predominantly Catholic or whatever, do you have any responsibility as far as providing them time or something to do their own thing, or how does that work? If you need to, as a chaplain, you're charged to help their spiritual needs, but if those don't jive with your personal beliefs, how do you do that? How do you handle that?
Roger, basically I would either do one of 2 things. I would help provide services where I could if there was any kind of similarities. And for example, like let's say that they wanted to pray the Lord's Prayer. I have no problem with that. Obviously my primary goal is ministry of presence. It's not necessarily to proselytize, although we can witness. And so that's another misnomer. But on top of that, I would help perform the service by getting an outlet for them, reaching out to either a fellow chaplain or even a civilian on the civilian side, being that it's a reserve capacity, to provide the service that maybe some of my soldiers would feel that they were lacking in. we don't have chaplains per se that are atheists, because there's no endorsers that are atheists that can provide atheist chaplains. Now they're trying to change that,
Mm-hmm.
but if I had an atheist soldier, and to date I have not, that I'm aware of, and we try to pull that pretty good. But if I did, and they wanted to worship a rock or a crystal or run naked through the woods and have a seance, right, I would be able to help provide that by reaching out to someone that would be of their faith to be able to help them have that religious element, because they have every right to be able, from a religious constitutional perspective, to have that belief, though I would totally disagree with what that belief would be.
Wow.
So I hope that clears it up.
Yeah, it does, and that's just an interesting situation to be in, definitely. Okay, well let's transition a little bit into more of the Christian man side of things. Can you give us maybe your definition of what a Christian man is?
Yeah, that's kind of tough, actually, when you start thinking about it. I think the first thing that would be a Christian man would be someone that is godly. Obviously, that would mean someone would have accepted the Lord and be saved. Um, maybe I'm taking a little bit of a personal approach here, but and I'm not a perfect parent by no means, and I don't claim to be a great instructor of being a parent, but something I'm working on with my son, who's 5 right now, that I've created and the Lord's been dealing with me about, is him becoming a man. How do I raise a man?
Mm-hmm.
Well, obviously, it takes a certain amount of that salvation experience, that godliness, and the exhibition or example that I would be setting. Paul told Timothy to be an example of the believers. And even though he was speaking of youth there, I think the other way it could be converse as well is that, you've got to show example to the young persons. I mean, when you're talking about a parental perspective, we're bringing up our children in the admonition of the Lord, but more importantly as well, we're not to cause our children and our sons to be disobedient to the faith because of having the wrong kind of testimony before them. Mm-hmm. So what I've created is kind of this thing of becoming a man of valor and a man of God. And so I've told my son from the time that he was probably 1 year old, that time that he could talk, we have a devotion at night. I've said, what's the most important thing in your life? And so we've reiterated it just about every single night, and that is becoming a man of God. And unfortunately, Isaac, I think what a lot of individuals have forsaken or forgotten even is that being a man of God doesn't necessarily mean being a preacher.
Mm-hmm.
And so I know there's some great men of God out there, and that's certainly not said to diminish their efforts or their ministry. But if we're going to have an impact on society with the rampant direction of our culture, the immorality that is so prevalent, we've got to have men that are willing to take a stand for family values, for biblical values, and getting back to those things in the marketplace and in the workplace just as much as in the church. And it's been kind of an unfortunate dichotomy, I think, a false dichotomy that we've created, that we have set up this division between what it means to serve as a man of God from the pulpit perspective than what it means to allow ourselves to be a man of God in the workplace. And sometimes we individuals that are on the civilian side might look down upon themselves. They might not think of themselves as well, I can't be a man of God because I can't be like that pastor. Well, sure you can. You can be a godly man of God. So I created this program, and it's going to be 13 separate years. And within those years, every time that my son finishes a grade of school, he'll start this coming fall with kindergarten. I am going to deal with the character for that year, and at the end, I'm going to present him with a weapon and have it on the wall. For example, the first year, I'm going to do David in the sling. And in 1 Samuel 16:18, it speaks of David being a mighty man. So I'm going to deal with courage. Just as an example, first, I won't go through all 13, but second year, I'm going to deal with Moses and the rod and how the rod went from being a rod to this rod to the rod of God, the power transition that Moses experienced as his confidence went from a self-confidence where he, found 3 excuses for the call God was putting on his life, to a confidence in God of the power God was using him to deliver the people of Israel from Egyptian bondage in Exodus 4 and thereafter. So I'm going to deal with those characters each year, and I hope by doing this, and secondarily coupled with raising my son in church and trying my hardest to be an example, and praying obviously, and studying scripture and having devotions, that these things will help my son to be the man that he should be when he reaches that age of maturity.
Wow, that's pretty awesome. It sounds like something that other people could use. I don't know if you have any plans on, mass marketing anything like that, but that sounds pretty incredible. So,
I
and that
appreciate that.
and that sounds like something I would look into because you may know, you may not know, I've got a little guy or a little girl on the way in July, so
I
you
heard.
know.
I'm looking forward to finding out which.
So am I. Oh man. Yeah, that's I don't even know what to say. That sounds like a really cool program you've got put together. So, and I do well with programs. I uh, just the ethereal or just the haphazard things I don't do well with. But if there's a thing that this year or this week or this month to focus on, I do well with that, and I think a lot of other men out there would too. So that's really cool. Well, also,
Thanks.
moving on to something a little bit different. What would you describe as a good Christian husband?
Yeah, that's another great question, Isaac, and especially one that I think is important from the perspective of a podcast. Obviously, the Bible speaks much to what a husband's supposed to be in Ephesians chapter 5 and 6, and more specifically about the fact of the love that is necessary and required to be a good husband. Interestingly, a lot of people think that there's never a command for the husband to love or for the wife to love the husband, that she's to obey him. But actually, there is a verse, and I can't pull it to the top of my head right now, but it does speak about loving your husbands, and I believe it's in Titus. But so there's an interesting dynamic there. I've read a lot of marital books. I've taken a lot of marital studies and certificates in the Army. As a chaplain, they like to train you on something called prep and something on strong bonds and all these different certifications that help you prepare for that. But to be a godly Christian husband is one that is obviously would lead their family, but would lead the family in the right way. And I think primarily that way is through charity and love.
Mm-hmm.
It's a difficult dynamic because I think, with the differences sometimes that are cultural between men and women, or just natural, like, what we could speak of, the way a woman might respond. And when I say a woman, it's not every woman, obviously. I'm not trying to, make that kind of box. But at the same time, there is this thing of women respond with with a different type of element that men do. Men respond with facts, and women responds with feelings, and
Yep.
It's just the way it is. So I think to be able to love your wife like Christ loved the church, to come back down, to humble yourself, to be able to be who she needs you to be, is a challenge, but it is a necessity in order to be a good Christian husband. So if I had to boil it down, bottom line, as a chaplain, that's probably what I would say.
That's good. And what you said about the way men in general and women in general respond to things with facts and feelings and stuff, it reminds me of something I'm pretty sure it was Brother Clint Cavanis preaching at Trinity several years back, talked about men need to be respected and women need to be loved. And I think that is a perfect example of what you just said. So that's pretty cool. Would you say now? I asked somebody else this the other day on an interview
Okay.
about marriage. Would you say that? Let me back up. We know that the man is supposed to be the leader of the household, correct?
Yes.
Now, would you say that the the spouses, the man and the woman, it's more of a cooperation than a dictatorship? Does that make sense? How I said that?
Yeah, it definitely makes sense. Um,
Would you agree?
yeah, I definitely don't think that it should be a dictatorship. I mean, obviously, there's a difference between a leader and a dictator. A dictator is one that drives. A leader is one that gets out in front and pulls and leads.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's definitely a distinction there. I think the old adage from a lot of preachers they talked about is when God created Adam, he created him out of the dust. I mean, he was rough, he was rugged. But when God created Eve, he didn't pull Eve's the bone from Adam out of the foot so that she could be trampled over. And neither did he pull a bone out of the head so that she could lead over him, but she pulled it closest to his heart, which was a rib. So, again, that's an old cliche from a preacher, and I think it kind of works well here from what you're asking is that, the unity and the oneness does create a sort of cooperativeness, cooperation. There's a mutual respect, even though men primarily, as you said, Clinton said, want respect more. I think everybody deserves and needs that respect, and both needs love. And so that goes to my point earlier.
Yeah.
It's primarily the motive of a woman to love, whereas man needs respect. While at the same time, it's something for both of us to cooperate with both of those elements.
Mm-hmm.
And so certainly, I think the same could be said of any relationship. A friendship, a pastoral relationship, any of it. And I can tell you by honesty as well as by experience, the negative aspect of what happens when you're not like that. The times when an individual is more, dictatorial. And what happens is the division and the separation that comes as a result of those things. Even if it's a one-time incident or a response or whatever it is.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's one thing I learned. I've been married for a little over 3 years now, and definitely as a single guy, you have this vision of how a marriage will be and how it should be and all this stuff. But a lot of times, all that stuff goes out the window once you get married. It's like, well, it's not quite exactly like I envisioned it. You know what I mean?
Oh,
So,
yeah.
and it's a huge. Well, I think one of the biggest growth periods I've had has been over the last 3 years. As personally, as a man and as a Christian, is that having to join your life with another human being and having to be vulnerable and having to be open, and it's a huge thing, and I don't think many single guys would understand that until they actually experience it.
I think you're probably right.
Yep. So, speaking of single men, let's shift it one more time before we wind it down.
Sure.
If there's some single guys out there that aren't married, they don't have kids, what type of advice or what type of lessons do you think they should learn before getting into those relationships
I think it's a great question. Again, I think the primary thing is by experience. I would say patience. Um, I was single till the age of 31.
Mm-hmm.
And my wife and I, there's a little bit of an age difference there, and it was who the Lord wanted me to marry. But my point is I had lots of opportunities, and I'm not saying that as in a braggadocious way, like that I was attracting all these women. I don't mean it like that. But
Yeah.
over the course of the length of that period of time between 18 and going on 31, that produced a lot of opportunities to be able to experience different relationships. And there were some that were really, really good girls and
Mm-hmm.
godly girls. Some missionaries that I went out with and some other girls, but that didn't mean it was right for me. And even in a couple of those situations, I might have maybe even produced a little bit of of affrontedness, of being, either too direct to disavow the relationship, or maybe even trying to make it work so much to see if it would work, maybe letting it go too long. And I think I was guilty of both.
Yeah.
And so the point that I'm trying to make is that patience is definitely a key. And, the one thing you desire as soon as you reach that age of maturity is you're looking for the one. And so the dilemma becomes, do I become Calvinistic or Arminian? Right? I mean, seriously, is God going to bring this woman to me right in my lap, or do I go out looking for her? And so, I faced that dilemma for quite a few number of years. Being on staff at a church in Fort Worth, at a relatively small church, at Friendly Lane there with Brother Hal, it was a great church. But there really weren't any ladies to date. And so you're faced with, okay, if I stay here and serve, what is that going to mean? Is the Lord going to bring a family here? Or do I leave and go to another college setting? And I did end up leaving, but I didn't leave for that reason. But my point is you're always kind of balanced between that dichotomy. And you're always wondering, God, I'm praying, I'm trusting you. But I think really the balance becomes just like with our salvation, is we don't become Arminian, we don't become Calvinistic. What we do is we try to split that dichotomy by staying faithful, staying true to God, waiting on the Lord, but praying and looking as hard as we can on the other side of it.
Mm-hmm.
And, if we never knock a door to try to witness to someone, then really we're so Calvinistic because we think God's just going to save them no matter what. While on the other hand, we can knock all the doors we want, but if we're not truly trusting the Lord to bring repentance and faith into the hearts of individuals and just leading them in a prayer, then obviously there's that part too. So you've got that dichotomy, and I think it's not an easy thing to split, but it is for single persons, I think, one of the premier things that they need to keep in mind.
Yeah, I do agree. That's a huge thing. And I didn't get married till I was 29, almost 30. And so there's a lot of years between 18 and 29 and 30. So
yeah, we were right there together, brother.
Yep. And like you said, I had several options, along the way. And just like you, there was probably one that I held on to for way longer than I should have, But there was that, I guess on my side, a clinginess, saying I don't know if I'm going to find somebody else, that type of thing. And so, if I were to give any advice to anybody, I think it's a lot harder to break up with somebody beyond that time than to break it off and find somebody else, And also, I think it's worse to end up with the wrong person than to be single. One thing I'm thankful for is that I got that mindset that I would rather be single than to be with the wrong person for the rest of my life.
You can just say it, miserable.
And whenever I was with this one girl, and she wasn't a bad girl, but we were in a dating couple for 3 years. It probably should have, if I was in a better financial situation, we probably would have got married. But I finally got to the point, says I'm not going to be able to make her happy, and if I can't make her happy, then I know I'm not going to be happy, and so I came to that realization, and I finally had to end it. But along the way, I came up with this thing. I said I would rather be single than to be with the wrong person, because I believe marriage is forever, and I wasn't going to leave that person if I married that person, and so then ipso facto, I'd be miserable for the rest of my life.
You're right, brother.
So, well, I really appreciate you taking the time, and I think we had a really good conversation. And if you ever do decide to put that parenting model for sons out on the market, just let me know, and I'll put the word out for you.
Hey, we can. I appreciate that very much, and we can talk about it offline. See if it's something I can. I mean, I'd be willing to I don't have to market it. I can just give it to you as an example. But I mean, it's not completed yet. I'm still working on it a little bit. But I do appreciate you allowing me to talk to you, and I'm really excited to look forward to see what the Lord does with this podcast.
Yes, sir. Well, thanks, Michael. You have a good day.
All right, Isaac. We'll see you, brother.